folks. Welcome to another episode of Film Study. This is Ken McCusick, and it's time for this week's Friday Morning GM. Today we have a guest co-host, and that's Spenser Peterson. Many times on the show for short episodes, but always appreciate his thoughts on things. Spenser, how are you doing?
Doing well. Excited for the draft being a week out, Ken.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. We had the Liars Luncheon come up. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but before we get into that, one roster piece of news today involving a Raven free agent is Trey White being signed by the Bills. Reportedly, the deal is 1 year for up to $6.5 million. I'm sure that's not all guaranteed with the word "up to" in there, but there is a kind of a minimum salary that might impact how the Ravens comp picks roll out.
Yeah, so that is set based on a percentile of league average salaries, and I believe the cutoff point per over the cap is around 3 million. So that up to could be a really important language here. If it's 3, he may or may not qualify. If it's 3.5, that counts as he's pretty comfortably into the 7th round pick trajectory or region there. And right now the Ravens are slotted to receive 3 comp picks, and that would take them up to the 4th maximum.
Okay, and it's 5.57 is what they have right now in the holster, supposedly.
Yeah, so the projections from over the cap, which are always pretty good at this, is a 5 for Stevens, a 5 for McCary, Harrison canceled out by DeAndre Hopkins, then a 7 for Josh Jones.
All right. So again, could be a year with 4 compensatory draft picks, not as good, but still reasonably good picks to have a couple extra fifths in there is nice. I thought about the signing and thought that it did now make a lot of sense. We've actually discussed this before on this show, but you had a choice between Awuzie and White. I think the Ravens really would have loved to have Trey White back, but it was a question of how much in the way of incentives was going to be needed. In the case of Awuzie, he just gets a vet minimum as a carve out of his previous deal with Tennessee, where he's making $7.5 million, and there's no incentive for the Ravens to pay him more, and Awuzie gains nothing from it, so he wouldn't demand that be the case. Just said the Ravens checked all the boxes. Otherwise, he makes roughly $1.5 million from the Ravens, and the rest is paid for by Tennessee. Whereas White might have cost the Ravens 3 or even 4 times as much, particularly if he had some significant playing time this year, and that then becomes a right player, right price situation. Even if you believe White was a little better, I'm not sure I would take a position either way on that. Then you still would think Awuzie was the better bargain.
Yeah, I'm in the exact same boat, Ken. I might even go as far as to say I prefer Awuzie, but at the price, I absolutely love it. And it's very rare in free agency that you're able to get a deal. Normally you have to be the highest payer by virtue of the way free agency works. But given the kind of contractual setup that you just mentioned and the offset language from his deal in Tennessee, we're actually able to get him below whatever that market price would have been, which is excellent.
And then you mentioned the other thing we mentioned is that because he was cut by his team, he doesn't impact the comp formula, but White is a lost free agent for the Ravens, who may in fact represent an additional comp pick. Unbelievably good. The Ravens are prescient with regard to taking advantage of the CBA and the nooks and crannies, how that affects the comp picks and cap positioning. The Michael Pierce delayed release is another example of really understanding what a team needs to do. They figured they might still need to use a post June 1 release on Tucker. They didn't want to use their last one just in case they had to make a good move. And this is just maybe a PR move more than anything else, is to not to defer the Pierce signing, so they didn't have to defer a Tucker signing. Just an organization that really gets it.
Yeah, just not leaving no stone unturned, just making sure they're crossing all the proverbial T's, dotting the I's.
There you go. All right, the Liars Luncheon. Let's move on a little bit. The pre-draft press conference, as otherwise known as. I understand, I've never been to it personally, but I understand they actually give the reporters lunch as part of this pre-draft press conference, and that's why it's called the Liars Luncheon. But some interesting things, and I'm just going to go through a few of the things that DeCosta talked about. We can talk about some of these or not as you see fit, Spenser. But he mentioned that draft picks are a currency. You use them to trade up, trade back, trade for the future. You might use them for any of those. One of the notions he was asked, kind of in the sense of, can they really use 11 picks and have them all stay? Well, they probably can't all make the team. I thought he did a good job of saying, you can trade a pick for the future as well, which is something I think this could be a year for the Ravens to reset some value, particularly if they're doing so from round 6 or round 7, where they have 5 selections. Be really nice for somebody else to need a late pick, have a guy that maybe they don't want to pursue in the with UDFA dollars from the UDFA pool. Maybe a 7 turns into a 6 next year, kind of thing. I think anytime you can make that sort of a trade, really worth moving up.
Get the shoddy reign of terror started.
There you go. Yeah. They mentioned how it's difficult to find left tackles. They don't grow on trees, I think were his exact words. And at the spot the Ravens normally pick, they wouldn't get one normally, which is why it made the Stanley extension so important. They didn't go much more into depth on that. He was asked about who might be off the board because of medicals or other concerns. I can tell you one point, I got to view the Ravens draft room immediately after the draft had occurred. So just for a State of the Ravens event, so people who were suite holders, or in my case, I worked for a corporation that had a suite, got to go on that visit, and all the plaques were up there. Some of them had black dots on them. A black dot meant that the Ravens had ruled you out for whatever reason. It's interesting because some of those black dots are medical, and some of them are obviously for other reasons as well, some behavioral reasons, possibly for some interview reasons as well. And my recollection is that number of 15 to maybe 20 sounds like about the right number. And in that particular year, the Ravens had actually drafted someone who had a black dot on his plaque, and that was Arthur Jones, who had an injury dot. But he dropped so far that the Ravens thought in the 5th round that they had to make that pick. Interesting, though, that obviously they're asking questions about some players. There are medical players, I'm sure, that the Ravens have said, well, we're not drafting this guy in the 1st round anymore. Jihad Campbell might be a guy who falls into that category, even though the Ravens could use him at 27. He might be he might really pay off. I think he probably falls into round 2 now with the shoulder surgery he's undergone, torn labrum, and what that might mean. But every year they're going to have guys they at least have to downgrade. But apparently very triggering, and there's people on Twitter who misinterpret it and think that somehow John Harbaugh is blocking certain players from being drafted, which is kind of amusing when you really understand who's in power in terms of the draft room.
It's potentially interesting when you mentioned resetting value, when you put the Voorhees pick. So there's maybe 2 ways you can think about this, either the Ajabo pick or the Voorhees pick. Mm-hmm. The Ajabo pick seems like they may have been burned on kind of pursuing that strategy of a guy who fell beyond, mocked as a top 15 pick, got to them in the 2nd round. And, there was sort of the calculation that the value was too much to pass up on, hasn't worked out. Mm-hmm. The opposite, or the kind of other route you could take, is Voorhees, which really is, because they use the NFI, because it was a late round pick, really played out as resetting of value, particularly when you can manipulate the end of the roster such that's not causing you to cut another player you would have otherwise kept. So interesting how they can potentially, even without trading out, potentially use one of those 11 picks to achieve a similar outcome.
Yeah, and that's I don't know the exact rules for the NFI, because there's certain players that if you could draft them in round 2 or round 3 that were injured during the season who still aren't ready to go. And that's several different players. The guy from Michigan, Will Johnson, still did not run a 40 at his pro day. And reportedly he was running slower in the high 4.5s, and that would have dropped his draft stock. And I think, he's a guy who you'd love to be able to NFI, but I believe his injury occurred during the season. And I don't know the rules exactly, but my feeling is if it happens during the season, whatnot, you can't NFI for him. But if it happened while he's training for the combine, at the combine, during his pro day, any of that stuff, you can NFI him for that. It's just, I don't think that in the case of a player like Will Johnson, he would be eager to sign a contract if NFI were going to be the outcome of that. I don't know what power he would have to like defer his draft or whatnot, but it'd be interesting to know that. But yeah, I'm in favor. I think the Ravens are going to be all in on the NFI boat if they draft another player, and it may depend on the player. That it can't be a guy right at the top of the draft, or they'll feel like they're betraying, or other players will be unhappy with the Ravens about it. But it seems like a natural course of action now that you'd rather take the Voorhees route than the Ojabo route.
And even if you can't use the NFI, there's certainly players, and like everything, it depends on the player and the situation. But when you're talking about the 6th and 7th round picks and they have 11 picks, you could take a flyer on a guy that you may have otherwise taken on the 4th, if he's there at 6 or 7, even if you lose that developmental year.
Yeah.
As a way of kind of rolling that value into the future.
Yeah, you're saying not NFI him, just roster him?
I would rather NFI if I can.
Yeah, sure, of course.
It's not allowed. The player is intriguing enough, and he's there in the 6th or 7th. And because you can IR him for the year,
yeah,
if you manipulate the end of the roster via handshake deals or whatever you're doing, it's possible to kind of accumulate value for the future rather than, as long as it's not forcing you to cut someone on the 53.
Yeah, the problem I have with that is losing the developmental year and losing the year of play is freaking enormous in terms of the cost. So it really does. It's worse than like trading up around or trading down around. In my mind, we could debate whether that or not would be true, but it's something that I think after they've been through it with Ajabo, I don't think they want to go through it again. So they're gonna. I kind of hope as a fan that they just let the medicals be the medicals and let them kind of direct how they do that. All right. He said they had 217 draftable players on the board, and that's much more than the 160 to 165 in the past. He talked a lot about the mid-round depth. I think that a lot of that may be GM speak to inflate the value of their late round picks. So I don't necessarily take that as being true. Maybe they do have 160 guys, but the reason they have 160 guys this year or 217 this year is because they know they need that many in order to get some of the low guys to make selections on them. They were non-committal about a pick at kicker. Got asked about that, of course. And the Ravens have never drafted a kicker. He mentioned that Randy Brown, is outstanding at scouting them, but they were non-committal about that. I think one of the big things that came out of this was they're non-committal about Mark Andrews' future. When asked if he might be traded, Eric said, I never know what's going to happen, kind of thing. But I do know Mark Andrews is a warrior. He's played great for us, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting one. Just there's really no good answer to this.
Yep.
You want to preserve your optionality. So you absolutely don't want to say we're trying to trade him because then that drives the market price down. And the flip side is you absolutely don't want to say we are going to trade him and then it doesn't materialize. So really, no comment is the route to go here. I don't know that there's anything meaningful they could have reasonably said about the situation.
Right. I think that they probably are not getting any signaling value with other teams by saying anything at this press conference. I think every other team is aware that Mark Andrews is available at the right price. He didn't have to say this to make that be known. So I could be wrong, but my guess is that he's been working the phones already, and the other teams have been talking about it maybe too. And my guess is I am not sure what gain there would be from them talking about it, particularly if there's two teams that might want him. But anyway, what kind of probability would you handicap it as that Mark Andrews goes at some point during the draft?
That he gets traded during the draft?
Yeah.
I think 20%.
I think that's a pretty good number. I was thinking maybe 30 to myself, but now I think I like your number better. Oh. All right. Well, we'll see. Hopefully folks out there will be joining us for the draft and in the stream that we enjoy doing every year, and we'll have a chance to talk to us about it there. The other thing, talked about Ardarius Washington a little bit, said he's likely to be back, or he's confident that he'll be back. Now he has until, I don't know which day, but I believe it's before the draft to sign his tender. There's no indication that another team has offered him something. And I think it's a little bit like the Lamar situation on obviously a much smaller scale, where no other team really wants to set the market for Ardarius Washington. So the Ravens just can have an easy way to sign him to a multi-year deal.
Yeah, I'm sure no other team wants to set the market. And it could be that any team that is, floated interest or talked to his agent, the number just isn't what he would want to agree with.
Right.
With the Ravens, since they have the right to match. So there's really no value, or if he's not getting the offer that he thinks he's worth, just the sides will be at an impasse.
Yeah, and that may mean it's a 1-year deal, what he's got, and that may really reduce the chance that he gets signed by the Ravens or extended by the Ravens, or maybe they come to terms as they have many times before the season begins, and he gets an extension. did talk about contract extensions in general. He said a lot of balls are up in the air, and this has been one of the kind of the frustrations so far this offseason is they haven't gotten the extension done for any of these third-year players. Not likely, not Travis Jones, not Tyler Linderbaum, which is absolutely huge right now, not Daniel Faulele, and not Ardarius Washington. So those are all guys who could be extended now, and some of them make a lot of sense. Others would be fairly easy to do, and they could make a lot of sense, but they haven't got one done yet.
Yeah, still waiting on that one.
All right. And a big one, he was asked about the year 5 options. He declined to say whether Linderbaum and or Hamilton were going to get those now. He said we're going to wait till it's time, and our intentions will be known at that point. And that's exactly what he did last year when he didn't give it to Patrick Queen. Last year, 2 years ago. I guess it was 2 years ago they didn't give it to Queen, right? Yeah, after the 22 season. Because he played 23 with the Ravens. He played 24 with the Steelers. So it was after the 22 season. So it would have been early 23.
Yeah, because last offseason was the decision on Bateman, I think, that then ended up being
a contract. Yeah,
exactly. Because of his snafu, but they exercised always.
Yep, exactly. Okay, so anyway, I don't think they would have any problem if it was only Hamilton. I don't think they'd have any problem just saying, look, he's definitely getting the year 5 option. In fact, he's probably getting the franchise tag if we can't work out that. I think the fact that there are 2 of them, they don't want to announce either. And they probably know that Linderbaum is either a very difficult, close to the line decision or something that they know they really can't meet.
Yeah, I mean, I think the worst thing they could do is have that reaction that you said at first regarding Hamilton, and then slow walk the Linderbaum conversation and say, well, they can't really comment on contractual matters. That just wouldn't be good for anyone inside or outside the locker room.
Yeah, I completely agree. And no one needs to know. I'm sure Linderbaum does already know that the Ravens are unlikely to give him this, but it doesn't mean there's no sense in trying to reduce Linderbaum's value to the rest of the league or anything by saying this. And in either case, it would, if they did give it to him, it would drastically change the negotiation.
If you're looking for a better way to unwind, focus, or even get a good night's sleep, listen up. Let me tell you about Mood, the online cannabis company that's changing the game when it comes to functional gummies. They've crafted a whole line of federally legal THC blends designed to help with everything from stress to sleep to mental clarity and even some spicier needs if you're into that. Now, what makes Mood different? They go beyond just THC. They pair it with herbs and adaptogens to create targeted effects that you won't find in any other dispensary. And every gummy is made with pesticide-free, small farm American cannabis, so you're getting quality that you can trust. I've tried their sleep gummies, and let me tell you, takes about 15 minutes, and I'm out cold, no grogginess, no weird side effects, getting some of the best sleep I've gotten in my life when I take one of these gummies. And if you need a mood boost, there are Epic Euphoria gummies, game changers. And right now, Mood is giving listeners 20% off their first order by using the promo code RAVENS at checkout. So head on over to mood.com, find the perfect gummy for whatever life throws your way, and don't forget to use the promo code RAVENS to save 20%.
Cheating dynamic for an extension. I don't see how they can possibly do it. So we'll see how this plays out. But I think the best chance to sign Tyler Linderbaum is probably before May 2nd when that thing is due. But they'll still have an opportunity afterwards on the current deal.
It's funny, given the relative values of the players, how it's the exact opposite situation for Hamilton. The presence of that your option is an incredible force for the Ravens from a negotiating standpoint. And even the subsequent franchise tag, I think they would be happy to pay him at those amounts.
Yeah, I mean, he's clearly worth it, I think. And it's interesting. So, the Ravens coming to this draft obviously have options at safety, and they may want a different type of safety. And one of the really great players in this draft is Nick Emenwari of South Carolina, who is about as close as you can get to Hamilton in terms of being a safety who can do it all. And brings more to the position than anybody has. He is the Bo Jackson of safeties. Bo Jackson brought incredible speed and size that the running back position had never seen when he got that came into the league originally. And Emanori is similar with relation to other safeties in terms of the size and speed. The point on that size speed curve he's on the efficient frontier, and he's at one of the best spots that anybody's ever been at. So will be interesting to see if he's one of the guys, or if the Ravens, they may or may not need to trade up. I've seen some mocks recently where both Jahdae Brown and Nick Emanori, who are two of my significant draft crushes this year, are taken in the 3 picks before the Ravens selected 27. And if you guys want to see me get upset, watch the draft unfold just like the last Warren Sharp poll went. Because even if they got Shamar Stewart, I believe, is the guy they had falling. He meets the need. He's a good player. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why it'd be good. I just like those other two guys better. So, all right, let's move on because we wanted to throw in something fun and draft related this time. So we came up with 3 hypothetical draft day trades, and these are all questions for you, Spencer, and then we'll have a little back and forth on them. So let's say the first one is an interesting one because I think it involves a divisional rival, and that is Shedeur Sanders drops in the draft. And we've heard this story recently that the Shedeur Sanders interview with the Steelers did not go well, and that the Steelers may have lost interest. Now, this could be complete manufacturing because they've got their own reasons to be absolutely lying about this, not letting somebody else trade ahead of them to get Sanders. But assume the Browns go ahead and take Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter, whoever they might take at number 2, and then Sanders falls on the board. The Steelers say no thanks, or maybe they take Jackson Dart instead, a potential second-round player. And Sanders is still on the board at number 27 when the Ravens pick. Would you trade the number 27 pick to the Cleveland Browns in the division, all the risk of the Browns finally finding their franchise quarterback, in exchange for the Browns' number 1 pick in 2026?
So there's 2 components to that question. I'll take them one at a time. The first one, on the Brown side of it, the Browns trading to get their franchise quarterback, quote unquote, or presumptive or prospective franchise quarterback, whatever you want to call it. I honestly don't really care about that part of it. Late first round quarterbacks are rarely very good, with the exception of one very notable one here in Baltimore. Even Joe Flacco, who was, I believe, the 18th overall pick, that's an absolute home run from that draft slot for a quarterback. If you're not taken in the top 10, chances are not great for a productive career. It happens, but there are tons of late first round quarterbacks that don't really.
Aaron Rodgers.
Oh yeah, 24. That's another one.
Yeah.
Then you have your Jason Campbells of the world, your Patrick Ramseys. So the list goes on. JP Losman, tons of them. Quarterbacks get overdrafted. Oftentimes, the second, third, or even fourth best quarterback is going in the top 10. So I'm not necessarily quaking in my boots if they trade up to 27 to get a quarterback. And I actually really love the idea of Cleveland moving assets forward into 2025. If I were running the Browns, I would do a hard reset in 25 and try to get as much draft capital in 26 and 27. I would try to clear out what is a atrocious financial picture for them, and leverage the fact that I probably have a more favorable discount rate into the future to trade with teams to get their 26 and 27 picks. I love the idea of them trying to move into the future and potentially wasting, if Sanders is their franchise quarterback, kind of wasting years of cheap control for him while they're still not out of the Deshaun Watson mess. So that's the Brown side of it. I'm not really bothered by that part of it. What I actually don't like about that potential trade is the trade itself. While I do think Cleveland will be bad next year, I don't love the idea of potentially trading a pick that could feasibly be in a worse spot than ours. I don't know if that's realistic.
For that to happen, the Browns with Shedeur Sanders would have to go to the divisional round at least.
I don't know that teams have ever traded a single round pick for one in the same round in the following year. It maybe has happened before. It would be pretty extreme though, just that the range of outcomes would overlap like that you're not trading for, and I know it's not possible in this situation, but one round up in the subsequent year. I assume it's going to be a better pick. I assume it's going to be a much better pick than ours. But to feel comfortable with it, I would want something else thrown in, maybe a 4th round pick this year.
Okay.
It sounds silly to tip the scales. I just don't like the risk profile of those potential outcomes overlapping.
I mean, I don't think that's what's going to be going to be the part that queers the deal. I think the part that queers the deal is the Browns have already been through the trading all their future assets to get Deshaun Watson. I think it's the hard reset component. I think it's just the fact that Shedeur Sanders probably is not good enough to warrant that kind of a trade. And it's very fortunate for the Ravens, frankly, that Shedeur Sanders is the presumptive second best quarterback available. And the Browns pick second, and the Titans also, this whole trifecta, are picking first and are projected to pick a quarterback. So Cam Ward presumably is going to be off the board, which means the Browns lost a ton of draft capital having the second overall pick relative to what you might get in other years.
Yeah, absolutely. I kind of like the idea of the trade. Like I said, I would want something else this year just to kind of smooth over that part of trading round for round and
Right.
moving here. I think it's a 98% chance it's a better pick next year, but I don't, it could feasibly be 12, 13, 14 and not a top 5 pick, in which case the value exchange there isn't as great, given that you're, deferring it for a year.
Yeah, and just to start with that, if you're talking about trading from 27 up to 12, let's say, that's a 520 point JJ shift, which is approximately equivalent to the 38th overall pick in the draft. So that's what you'd be getting in exchange for waiting a year.
Right.
That's your only cost, is waiting the year.
That's a pretty steep cost. I mean, when you look at the history of revealed preference for draft trades, that's a pretty steep cost.
Okay, well let's relate that. But the 520 is a increment to your own value of that pick's only 680. And you're getting 520 more by waiting a year and assuming, I think pretty favorably, frankly, that the Browns would be pretty conservatively, that the Browns would be as low as 14th to draft. All right. Anyway, I don't disagree with your thought process anyway. Get something now, and you're going to try and bleed them for whatever you can get from them anyway. But now I might be a little concerned that the Browns could get this deal from somebody else who's right in the same range. 26, 27, 28, 29, any of those teams might be willing to pull the trigger on that kind of an arrangement. And as long as Sanders is available, then it seems reasonable. And it has the valuable fifth-year option on a quarterback that they would want to have. So anyway, the JJ chart, by the way, does not properly reflect the drop off from 32 to 33 in terms of there being no fifth-year option there. All right, let me give you number 2. And the next two are going to both involve tight ends. The first one is Andrews is traded for an exchange of number 2 picks. And somebody else actually posted this the other day. How many slots do you need to move up from 59 to make that trade worthwhile?
Yeah, so this exercise, when I was thinking about this, really teases out the steepness of the JJ chart, especially in the early rounds. I started thinking about how many slots would I feel good about just even before looking at the JJ chart. And 10, I'm not particularly excited about moving up 10 spots in the round. If we were to move up 20 spots, then I feel like, oh, that's a great, move up the board. And that's just my gut feeling. And if I relate that to JJ points, to move up 20 spots, that's
pick 78.
I'm sorry.
It's 200.
I'm sorry. I thought the question was of second round picks, like you were exchanging.
Right. So here's the point. If you move up 20 slots, it's a difference of 200 JJ points, and the equivalent JJ pointage is at pick number 78 overall.
Oh, yes.
200.
Yes. Now I see what you're saying. To get up to pick 39, yes, it would be Arizona's pick at 78 in the mid-third round. And I think I'd feel pretty good about that, actually.
Yeah, and this year you're really only trading second round picks, so you got to decide like how good is the smorgasbord of players I can choose from in the second round when I move up that much. There are a lot of players who I don't think are going to make it to 59, but they certainly look like they make it to 39. And I'll, if you might say, I don't care which one of those players I get, but might be Harmon lasts till 39. It could be any one of several offensive tackles make it to 39. It could be Watts would make it to 39, but not 59. It could be just a lot of players that you might draft in the second round. Number of edge rushers really fall into the category. I think moving up 20 to me would be a no-brainer. The actual suggestion was in terms of the Colts pick at 45. I thought that was also kind of a no-brainer as well, that you'd move up that far. But I applaud you being greedy.
Yeah, I think 45 is basically valuing him almost at the last pick of the third round. When I was looking at this, just to kind of benchmark what he's worth, and I looked at pick 96, 116 JJ points, that would get you up somewhere between pick 47 or 48, so an 11 or 12 spot move up. So similar to what you're suggesting there.
Right. All right, and there might be somebody who could actually trade you both things, a slight trade up plus a pick later that would total the amount you might be happy with as well. Okay, third attempt, and again, please understand, this does not come from the position of me wanting to get rid of Isaiah Likely. I get berated all the time about this particular thing, but they've got to find out if they can sign Isaiah Likely. So far, it hasn't happened. They say they've got balls in the air. I imagine Likely is one of them, that they're trying to sign him along with Travis Jones, along with Linderbaum, along with Hamilton. They're trying to make moves on all these guys. But in the case of Likely, they may already know that he's out of range. So let's kind of assume we're at that point, that the most you're gonna have from Likely is this one additional year. So if the Ravens traded Likely and their third round selection, so this is a case where the other team wants a pick back this year, but they also want Isaiah Likely. What is the minimum pick you need to get in return for the combination of Likely and a third round pick? And your third round pick is number 91. I'll just give you some JJ values here for a minute. The JJ value of number 91 is 136 points. And so it's 136 plus Isaiah Likely gets you to where?
Yeah, so I think, and maybe this is a little greedy, but 34 to the Giants, which is 560 JJ points. The difference there is 420 points, which is equivalent to the 16th pick of the second round, number 48 of Miami.
Okay. By the way, completely agree with that logic there. I'd love to see if we could get 33 for it, because that has additional overnight value for trade back purposes and whatnot. But I think that'd be an outstanding pick. Getting pick 34 in exchange for Likely in 91. Again, this is a matter, obviously, if they trade Likely, it's going to be because they know they can't sign him. So they know we've only got 1 year of Isaiah Likely, not the rest of Isaiah Likely's career. Isaiah Likely has kind of already priced himself out of Baltimore, and he's not going to the Ravens Ring of Honor. They want to have targets for Lamar, but they also are in a horrible box of a position of not being able to draft a tight end.
Yeah, I will say the one thing about, you are right, if this is coming from a place of not being able to sign Isaiah Likely long term. The one thing they do have in their favor is that the tight end position in Isaiah Likely might be a reasonable use of the franchise tag next year, given the resultant salary. So you do have to consider that. Plus, obviously, and this is priced into what we're talking about, but the play on the field that Isaiah Likely gives you. They're not in a position where they have to trade him, to just unload it because they have some expiring asset they need to get rid of. So they are in a position to demand value in this case.
You're right. That is a critical additional market friction that they need to consider is can the franchise tag be used still on Isaiah Likely? I don't see any reason why they would use the franchise tag on Mark Andrews. So I don't think that's a logical way. And certainly of the two of them, there's no doubt I'd rather have Likely than Andrews in terms of the years going forward. But interesting set of thought experiments, something we like to do on this show. Spenser, always a pleasure talking football with you. And anything else you would like to discuss before we go on? Some other draft hope you have, perhaps?
I try not to fall in love at this time of year because it, hard to not be disappointed when the player you've been following for the pre-draft period doesn't get taken or gets taken before you. But, I find myself getting really, really excited about Emin Wari. I think that would be great. But I think there's actually, as you've mentioned a lot of times, the Ravens have really set themselves up nicely to be able to pick for value here. And whether it's edge rusher, whether it's one of the linemen, there's just a lot of picks I would actually be pretty excited about at the end of round one.
Yeah. And I think it probably also means that trading back is a reasonable possibility again, even with all the picks they have. It could mean trading back early and then trading back up later, acquiring more picks. And what DaCosta says is the real meat of this draft in rounds 3, 4, 5, which they could end up doing. So exciting, and certainly looking forward to the draft this week. There's been a lot of work coming up to this point, and I'm frankly I'm always exhausted by draft night itself. And then we'll have a lot of fun. Spenser, you're going to be on for the draft show, at least for I think I have you on for 2 nights, right?
That's the plan.
Okay, fantastic. Really looking forward to it. Tell folks where they can talk football with you online.
You can find me at Spenser CP on Twitter X, and always looking to talk Ravens football.
All right, other folks out there, thanks so much for the listens and the loyalty to this show in particular. We really appreciate it. Voss is still working on his restaurant, and hopefully he'll be back on the show full time by the time the regular season begins. I think until at least camp, he's probably going to be about a once-a-month participant, and we'll have other people like Spenser and Matt Ruff join us as the co-hosts. Otherwise, Spenser, thanks again for joining me for this one, and we'll talk to you next time on Film Study.